Welcome to the Happy Lawyer Project. I'm your host, Akoma Moronu, and I created this show to help lawyers find happiness in life with a law degree. And together with my guests, we provide the knowledge, skills, insight, inspiration, and encouragement you need to find your happy. Speaking of guests, I actually don't have a guest for you guys today because it's my birthday. And in honor of my birthday, I'm going to be doing another Q&A show where guests can ask me specific questions about myself, my life, my thoughts. And I have on Mr. Happy Lawyer Project himself. Hey, Dave, you want to say hi to the audience?
Hi, guests and audience. What's up? Happy birthday to my one and only.
Yeah, so as you guys know, I have been taking a lot more questions on LinkedIn, Instagram, email, however you guys reach out to me, and I wanted to take the time to answer some of those questions for you guys here today. So I have Dave here to help me go through those questions and to make sure that I don't ramble on. So Dave, why don't you read the first question?
Great. Happy to do so. So Calla on Instagram asks, I would love to hear, 1, how you went from big law to corporate law, 2, what the transition was like for you, and 3, if you have any tips for resumes. I would love to just get feedback, even from guests, on resumes and what they personally look for or have on theirs.
Well, thank you, Calla, for the great question. There's a lot in there, so I will try to touch on each of those points. So as far as going from big law to corporate law, you've probably all heard me say a bunch of times that I was not somebody who was necessarily looking to go in-house. I think that one of the things that I did do in my practice was that I worked in a very niche practice. I was not a generalist by any stretch of the imagination. I was very much a securities lawyer, and the bulk of my work ended up being in the aviation space, whether that was securitizations or bond deals. It really all touched the aviation industry. And because of that, I built relationships with recruiters in that niche because there aren't that many lawyers who specialize in that space. So when I was looking to make the move down to Texas, there was an opportunity for me to come in-house. And at the time, as I've learned, in-house jobs tend to unfold a little more slowly than big law jobs. So at the time, I got an offer on the table from a big law firm here in Texas, and I didn't have an offer from the company. So I went ahead and took the big law offer and then came down and actually really, really liked the GC. So we remained friends. Once I moved down here, he took me out to lunch a couple of times. He asked me how things were going. And after about a year, they still hadn't found anybody for that role. Back to that thing about being in a very niche practice. And so he asked me if I'd be interested in making the move. And so at that point, I decided that I would and that it would be really fun to work with him. So I decided to make the leap. And to be honest, the transition has been 2 parts challenging and 1 part fun. In my new role, I have a ton of opportunity for professional growth, but with that comes a huge amount of responsibility, and there's not nearly as much insulation as I had at the firm. I feel like at a firm, at least in my practice, I had a lot of really great mentors and great colleagues who I could always go to for advice, who did the exact same thing that I did. So we could bounce ideas off of each other. And now I'm the only aviation lawyer. And so I really have to do the research on my own and really source information and make big decisions based on my own research. And so that can be really, really scary. And, I support a global company. So I'm working in tons and tons of jurisdictions and managing outside counsel in many, many jurisdictions. So it's super, super fun, but definitely really challenging and a lot of hard work. I know that there is this belief that when people go in-house, it's for a lifestyle change. And that certainly has not been the case in my circumstance. And it wasn't what I was looking for. It was definitely a situation where I was being given an opportunity to grow professionally. And so I would say that I've worked more in the last year and a half than I certainly had worked in the last year and a half in private practice. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's certainly been a really, really busy and a really challenging year. And from a work perspective, the reality is that on a daily basis, I'm really being asked to take on legal, corporate, and commercial challenges and issues that I've never seen or even thought about. And that's really fun for me because I get to explore lots of new areas of the law and get to engage in a business in a really entrepreneurial way. But as you can imagine, as a lawyer, I want to get things right. I want to know what I'm talking about when I give people advice. So it puts a lot of pressure on me to perform. So it's back to your original question about kind of how I made that transition. There's a little secret about me, which I've only recently discovered. And the reality is that I've never had real professional aspirations. That might sound weird for somebody in my position, but the reality is that I've always just enjoyed accomplishing things and being a productive member of a team and having opportunities to learn new skills. But I've never really been particularly tied to a specific title. The way some people want to be a GC or they want to be a partner or they want to be a CEO, that's never been that appealing to me. Not that I wouldn't want to be any of those things, but it was more about the life I want and the opportunities I wanted to have in that life, whatever the title may be at the end of the day. So when I'm deciding what to do in my career, I'm often asking myself, will this opportunity give me a chance to work with people who I respect and to develop skills that I'm interested in developing? And if the answer to both those questions is yes, then I go for it. And that's how I ended up where I am today. So on the resume question, I would actually direct you to episode 63, in which I talked to Wendy Weiner about how to create a brand around your resume and pitching yourself to firms and potential employers. I mean, she's a real expert on resume writing. So listen to that episode and then check out all of her content and she'll give you like everything you need to know on resume writing. From my perspective as a resume reader, I was on the recruiting committee at both firms. I've read tons and tons of resumes. I've been resume workshops. And I personally, when I look at resumes, the number one thing I'm looking at is, does this person understand what skill set is required for this job? And the way they show me that is the way they tailor their resume. Do they understand what I'm looking for? Do they understand what types of responsibilities they'd be asked to take on? What type of judgment they would need to have? What type of experiences I would be expecting to see? When you really curate your resume to only include things that I find relevant, it's not that I think you're a perfect fit and I think you haven't done anything else in your career except things that perfectly fit the thing I'm looking for. It's that I think you get it. And that, to me, is the first step in showing that you're somebody who has really good judgment. So I would say the key takeaways for this is that in getting this job, for me, the key was maintaining relationships, both recruiters and then with the GC, who I actually really enjoyed. And by doing that, I found an opportunity to come in at a time that I might not otherwise have. I also would say that a key for me is knowing what drives you professionally. For some people, that is getting into that GC role. For other people, it's into that lifestyle in-house role. And for me, it's really just certain opportunities. And lastly, I would say that you just need to be flexible. Life isn't going to play out the way you expect. So just know what your, what's the word? Know what the deal breakers are for you. And I think once you have that, it's a lot easier to make decisions that are directionally correct and will lead you towards a better lifestyle.
Awesome. That was great. Moving on to the next question. This is from Sincerely Emily on Instagram, and she asks, I would like to hear more about life hacks and happiness. If I had to pick one, I would probably say I'd like to learn more about happiness. I love learning more about how to stay balanced and about figuring out my priorities.
Thanks, Emily. So that's a pretty big question, happiness generally. So I'm just going to go through a couple of things that I think about when I think about how I manage my own happiness. So I, over the years, have developed this 4-point checklist for figuring out kind of how to improve the happiness in my life. If I'm feeling a little bit down or a little misaligned, I go through this little checklist and it helps me to recenter and make better decisions. So there's 4 factors. The first is attitude. 1, am I just being a grump? Am I just choosing to be upset and to focus on the negative? Is this, where's my mind at? Is this opportunity or this situation that's making me so upset? Is there something I can do to change it? And is it possible to be happy within, the context that I'm being given? So for example, when I was in Big Law, when things were really, really hard, when I'd go through really hard times, I would just take a step back and realize how lucky I was to have a job, to be making as much money as I was making, and to realize that at any point I could quit. If it really got that bad, I didn't have to stay there forever. And so in choosing to stay, I was choosing to prioritize the learning and the financial security. And I found a lot of gratitude in that approach. The second thing on the list is acknowledgement, or the awesome factor. I have learned over the years, and there's lots of happiness studies around this, that people generally, we like to be good at things. We like to be acknowledged for being good at things. And sometimes that's acknowledged by other people. Sometimes it's, taking the time to acknowledge yourself, to appreciate kind of how far you've come. So if I'm feeling really down, a simple gratitude practice, spending some time each day at the end of each day to write down 3 things I'm grateful for like a week, 10 days, that tends to turn my mood around as well. 3 aspirations. One of the things that can lead to feeling a little down or lost is not knowing where you're headed, not knowing what your goals are, not having a dream that lights you up. And you don't necessarily need to know how you're going to accomplish that dream. You don't necessarily need to have a 10-point list of how it's going to get done and a timeline for when it's going to get done. I mean, those things are all great, and those are, preferred if you can get there. But at the very base level, you should have one big dream in your heart, in your mind's eye, that lights you up, that whether it's creating an Pinterest board around it or making informational calls to people who could probably help you get there, that just doing little tasks each day kind of brighten up your day. And for me, one of my big aspirations is I want to build a house. I don't know when or where, or really I have very little detail about the, practicalities of the house. All I know is the style of house I want. I've drawn blueprint after blueprint. I have this giant Pinterest board where I just collect all these images of beautiful houses. I watch architecture shows. I collect images in magazines. When we're at hotels, I'll take pictures of a little corner in a bathroom or a little, door hinge. And I'm like, oh, this should go in my house. Something like this should go in my house. And I love that dream. And it really lights me up to think about it. And I don't know if it'll ever come true, but it's definitely something that can brighten my mood. So the last one is alignment. And that one is, am I making decisions that are moving me towards the things that matter to me? Am I making decisions that are in alignment with who I am, with the life that I want? Or am I just really kind of going through the motions without really knowing what the purpose is and what the direction of my life should be? And so if I can go through that checklist and work through those 4 things, attitude, acknowledgement, aspirations, and alignment, usually if I get through all 4, my life will feel much better. So as far as decision making, when I am struggling with a decision, I am usually struggling with 2 big dreams. I tend to be a big dreamer who wants to do lots and lots, as Dave can attest to. I'll come home with an amazing idea for some amazing concept. And as everybody knows, we have limited time, we have limited resources. And so for me, pro-con lists don't work very well, just because I can talk myself in and out of just about anything. And at the end of the day, what a pro-con list really does is it gives almost equal weight to items. And so you consciously or subconsciously are going to build one side up more than another. And so if that works for you, great, stick with it. But for me, there are 3 questions that I've been starting to ask myself around these big ideas. And those questions are, does this feel like a must or a should? How does this decision feel? And which is the safer play and which is the bigger play? And we were actually just listening to a podcast recently where the host said that if you can't decide after all that, you should flip a coin. And the coin won't actually tell you the answer, but when that coin is in the air, that gut feeling you have in your stomach about where you want it to land will tell you which one you actually want. So if none of those questions work, just flip a coin. Lastly, I would also make note that I don't actually believe in balance. On episode 60, I chat with Rachel Brenke about this concept of work-life balance and how I prefer the phrase work-life satisfaction. And Rachel Brenke is someone who should know about this. She's a mom of 5. She runs 4 businesses, including a law firm. She's a children's book author. She runs triathlons. Like, she is just all in on life. Like, Rachel's got it so much going on. And that's the issue that I have with the phrase work-life balance. Because I think that for different people, that's going to look very, very different. And so you really have to figure out what that looks like for you and what looks like for you at any point in your life. There's 2 things that I rely on. One is a belief that deep work is important, but people can only do a limited amount of that. So I try to only schedule about 4 hours of deep work a day. The rest of my work in a day tends to be administrative work, fun work, kind of errands, that type of stuff. And the reading that I've done, 4 hours of deep work, 6 days a week will get you quite far in life. You can read more on that in Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, if you guys are interested in that concept. And the other thing that's really important to me is sleep. I think that there are lots of people out there who are all about the hustle and the grind, but while I acknowledge that that works for some people, I don't subscribe to the Gary Vee school of thought around hustle. And I definitely think that the flip side to thinking that you can only work 4 hours deeply is the belief that if you're well rested, those deep work hours will be more productive, so you can get more done in less time. I mean, there's lots of science around this about the importance of sleep and the importance of letting your mind wander and to having downtime and all of these things. So I know that I'm at my best when I've had at least 6 to 7 hours of sleep and preferably 1 nap during the course of the day. So that's how I try to structure my life. And if you guys are interested in those concepts, you should check out the book Rest by Alex Soojung Kim Pang. He talks about the science of rest and all of these really amazing people throughout history, like Darwin, for example, who literally only worked for 3 hours a day and wrote thousands of articles and was one of the most well-researched naturalists. And he really spent most of his time just walking in nature and had 3 90-minute periods a day of deep work that he did. So it's very, very interesting when you see the different schedules that people over time have kept to accomplish as much as they did. So my advice with this very general question, and I'm of course happy to go into more detail if anybody has questions out there, but generally speaking, when it comes to happiness and work-life satisfaction, I would say that at each stage in your life, you need to be asking yourself, what would a satisfactory work-life schedule look like for me right now? So hopefully that helps.
That's a great topic. I feel like we could talk about that one forever. It's really interesting to me. So moving on, the last question for tonight comes from Nicole, also on Instagram. She asked, what are the key lessons that you've learned from interviewing lawyers for over 3 years? Congrats, over 3 years? Wow.
Yeah, I know. Well, I started interviewing in 2015.
Yep.
So it's been, a long stretch now. It took a while for me to get to the point where I was willing to put the episodes out there, but here we are. And so I went through a whole bunch of my show notes. I went back through old questions to try to figure out what the key takeaways were. And I boiled it down to these 4 points. 1, you have to be willing to build a career on your own terms. This seems really obvious, but I think that for a long time, a lot of us believe that if you just follow the rules and do the things that people tell you to do, eventually it'll work out. Eventually you'll find happiness, eventually you'll get to the end of that rainbow, and eventually you'll be happy. But the reality is that that doesn't work, and nobody who's happy took that path. So there is a degree of self-awareness that's required, and you have to do that work. We were actually just talking about this last night, Dave and I, about how a lot of the way we're taught to do things is front-loaded. You think that if you put in the work on the front, that you can just coast through the back half. Whether that's you go to school for 18 years and then you just never have to go to school again for the rest of your life, or you buy a house and then you just never have to do anything on the house ever again. Everything requires ongoing maintenance, requires ongoing,
like attention.
Exactly. And that includes yourself. Like you're changing, you're growing, you're developing. And in order for you to do it in an intentional way and to maintain some level of control and agency in your life, you really do need to spend time figuring out what you need, what you like, and where you're going. And obviously, if you're listening to this podcast, you're someone who cares about those things. So I won't go into any more detail about this, but that was the first one. And the second one was achieving happiness is not an intellectual exercise. If anything, it's often more of a lived experience. You have to do in order to be, I feel that sometimes as lawyers, we get really in our heads. And even when we talk about happiness a lot, we talk about it being a mindset. We talk about controlling your mind. And sometimes that can lead to the wrong message, that if you just think about being happy enough, or if you just put enough happy thoughts in your mind, that's going to change your life. But they go together. You still live in the real world. You still live an actual human experience. You don't just live kind of this mental existence in your head. So in order to be happy, you have to do things that make you happy. And sometimes you're going to have to do things that make you unhappy to figure out what makes you happy. For people who haven't spent a lot of time prioritizing their own happiness, and for people who haven't spent a lot of time thinking about their own happiness, it may not be intuitive what's going to make you happy. You may have no idea what's going to make you happy. In fact, studies have shown people are really bad at gauging what's going to make them happy. So don't be disappointed if you're like, oh, I always thought I wanted to be a dancer and I've taken dance lessons for 6 months and I'm not only terrible at it, but I hate doing it. That's just part of it. But the more you do, the more you'll learn, and hopefully you'll enjoy the journey along the way. But at the end of the day, as much as we harp on mindset, which I think is so, so important, it's also about getting out there and being happy and quote unquote doing happy. So number 3, this is a phrase I've probably used on the podcast a million times. Your leaky boundaries will drown you. We talk so much about having boundaries, about learning to say no, about the importance of knowing your worth, all of these important, statements about how to be in the world and how to create space for yourself and for your own priorities and interests. But I think it can be very, very challenging for people to know how to stick to that really strong line and when to put their foot down. It's obviously easy to say, learn how to say no, but it's hard when you're working at a firm. How do you say no to a partner when they're asking you to do something and you have plans and you're going to cancel on somebody very important for the 5th time in a row? How do you say no to somebody who's done you a million favors and you really don't have time to do them this favor, but you owe them and you really don't want to? But learning how to say no in a caring, tactful way, learning how to say no that doesn't hurt people's feelings, that doesn't burn bridges, that's all part of this journey. And that's the way you get to the next stage. If you just keep getting stuck in this cycle where you're making exceptions for people just because of, one-off, quote unquote, circumstances, the problem is eventually the boundaries don't mean anything. They don't mean anything to other people, and they don't mean anything to you. And that's the more disappointing part, is that you don't become somebody that you can rely on. Because mentally, that when you set a boundary, you're not actually going to stick to it. And I think that's probably the worst part of that. So really think about the boundaries you set, and don't just think about how to set them, but think about how you're going to enforce them, especially during the tough times when you want to let just that one exception in. The caveat to all of that is, of course, there are going to be cases that are real cases that you need to make exceptions, but that has to be done with intention, and that has to be done with an understanding of what it does to set boundary. I hope that made sense. And then the very last thing I would say is, being happy is not easy, but it's really simple. You have to figure out what makes you happy and do that. I think we sometimes confuse that, which sounds simple, for being easy. And I don't mean to make it sound like we should all just go and hike the Himalayas. Not that that's going to make a lot of people happy. I'm not saying we should all quit our jobs and, renovate some sort of Sprinter van and travel America doing YouTube videos about different diner pancakes. Like, I get it. You have responsibilities. You want to make an impact in the world. You have, people you care about. You want to be successful in the traditional sense of the word. There's all these things that create kind of limitations around your ability to just myopically follow that wild dream. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't follow it. So I really, really hope that you guys are out there thinking about ways to be happy, live happier, and that this episode has helped you to get a little bit closer to that. As always, thank you so much for listening. And if you guys have any questions, I want to start doing these about once a month. So you guys can direct message me on Instagram. You can send me a tweet. I actually don't know how Twitter works, but you can find me on there and hopefully I'll find your message. I'm no longer on Facebook, so don't Facebook message me, but you can also email me at acoma@thehappylawyerproject.com. And if you go to the website, there's just this little, what do you call it? That little thing that hangs on
a widget.
I don't know, it's called a widget, but it looks like a tab on the side of the screen, and you can actually leave a voicemail. But if you guys can't figure that out, you can also just leave a voicemail on your phone and just email that to me at acoma@thehappylawyerproject.com, because I would love to include your voices on the show. So thank you so much for listening, and until next time, have a good one.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks for listening.